Whakarongo rā e tāne ki te ahurewa, ki te pūkenga, ki te wānanga, ki te tauira, ki te tauira. E pū e ia te take e ue nuku e ue rangi. Tēnei ka hoho ki runga ki te tupua, ka hoho ki runga ki te tawhito, ka hoho ki runga ki te kāhui o ngātua, ki apita rā e nei tauira ki te whai au, ki te ao marama, whano, tū mai te toki, haumi e, hui e, tae ki e. Tuia te rangi e tūne, tuia te papa e horani. Tuia te pāpoki ahu, tuia te marae o te rau karamu. Tuia te mana whenua ko te Aotearoa, tihei mauri ora ki te whai au, ki te ao marama. I tēnei wā ka tuatu tēnei ki te whakatau i tō tātou primia, ko roatahi ko te minita, haere mai, haere mai, haere mai. Haere mai rā ki te marae poki ahu o tira te rau karamu. Haere mai i runga i te reo karanga, te reo pōwhiri, te reo whakatau, kia koe te primia, kia koroatahi, koutou ngā rangatira o te motu, haere mai, haere mai, haere mai rā. I tēnei wā ka huringa whakaaro, kia rātau mā kua mene atu ki te pō. Ka tangihia tērā o ngā rauru ko ati hurunui tērā. Tētahi o ngā toa Māori, ki te whakapara i te huarahi, ki te mahi pūtae ao, hui katoa ngā mate, kei rungi a kōtau, kei rungi a mātou. Ka whakairihi ake te pūmahara, ki rātou katoa ki te tāu huhu o te whare kōrero i tēnei yahi. Ko rātou ki a rātou, ka hoki mai rā ki a tātou e whakakiki nei ngā whāwhārua o rātou mā, Māori ora ki a tātou, Māori ora ki te kaupapa. Kai te primia e mihi atu rā ki a koe. Ko koe te kaupapa, ko karamuia, te tini, te mano, ki tēnei o ngā kaupapa nui, whakaharahara i tēnei rā, ara ko te mahi pūtae. Ka kōrero o tātou mo te kāhui atua, koe nā te pūtake o tēnei o ngā kaupapa. Nō reira, kai te mihi rā ki a koe. Kai te mihi rā ki a kōtau o te whare pāremata. Kai te mihi rā ki tērā o ngā minita, ko kiritapu. I roto i te mōhi o tēnei wā taumaha mōna me te kōrero kia piki te kaha, kia piki te ora ki aia i tēnei wā. Ka huri atu rā ngā mihi kia koutou katoa. Te mareikura, Hendy, i tō whakaeke ki tēnei o ngā tūranga, ka mihi atu rā kia koe. Koutou o te apārangi, koutou ngā minita, ngā mana, ngā toa i tēnei rā. Me ki pēnei au ko toa katoa a Aotearoa i tēnei rā, i tēnei o ngā eki ngā taumata. Nō reira ko tāku i tēnei wā. He mihi atu rā kia koutou katoa ko tai mai. Ki te whakarongo, ki te titiro, ki te mātakitaki, ki ngā mahi ātāhua a enei o tātou ko whakaeke mai ki tēnei o ngā whare i tēnei rā. A ka tiake, kāre au te whakatoroa i ngā kōrero, whai anō tāku, te mihi nei ki tō tātou nei primia, te mihi ki ngā minita, te mihi ki a koutou, ngā tangata, ngā toa o te mahi pūtae au, koutou, ko tatu mai ki te whakanui i te kaupapa o te rā, ara ko ngā taonga pui aki a tō tātou primia. Huri atu, huri mai ki a koutou, ki a tātou katoa, e hui tahi nei i tēnei yahi, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Hoi anō rā e te iwi. Me huri au ki te reo tuarua mo tētahi wā poto, kia mārama, kia mōhi wai tātou ki te āhua o ngā mahi i tēnei yahi. Prime Minister, Ministers, thank you for your support of this kaupapa. It's an absolute honour and privilege to have you with us today. I firstly just want to acknowledge the place of Te Aotearoa and this place upon which we gather, known as Pukeahu. And Prime Minister, I also want to acknowledge the support of the Deputy Prime Minister 2 weeks ago in the opening of Te Rau Karamu, the new marae for Te Kununga ki Pūrehuroa, Massey University, and just to acknowledge the supports and the tautoko from your colleagues. Also to acknowledge those of you who have come from near and afar to be with us today in amidst the manaakitanga of Te Aotearoa. It's a privilege to have you all here today, and it's my privilege also to open the proceedings with a karakia that speaks to the criticality of science, of mātauranga Māori, and of a flourishing future for Aotearoa. So without any further ado, I want to now pass on the rākau kōrero, if I can, to our MCs for this afternoon, Dan Henry and Dr. Moana Theodore, no reira kia kōrua. Tēnei rā te tuku rā te rākau kōrero kia kōrua, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Ko Moana Theodore tōku ingoa. Kia ora everyone. My name's Moana Theodore and I'm a counsellor of the Royal Society Te Aoparangi. It's an absolute honour and privilege to be one of your kai whakataki, your hosts, for this year's Ko Ngā Pui Pui Aki Pūtaiao a Te Premier, the Prime Minister's Science Prizes, in a year where science played such an important role in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Thank you, Professor Jury, for your warm welcome to everyone, and it's lovely to be co-hosting this event with Dan Henry. Kia ora, Dan.
Kia ora. Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Dan Henry tōku ingoa. Thank you for having me here this afternoon to share this occasion with you. This is my second time MCing these awards, but last year, of course, with COVID, it was a digital ceremony, so it was just beamed out across social media, and I didn't get a chance to see everyone here in the room, but that's a pretty special thing. It's just fantastic to be celebrating science and scientists this afternoon. In the lead up to today, I was reflecting on the role of science in our society, and it occurred to me that often with a scientific discovery, it gives us a great benefit, but then there's often a flip side to that discovery. So an easy example would be maybe the combustion engine. Obviously, that's allowed us to travel fast and far around the world and shrunk the globe, but it turns out it's not been so flash for the environment and the climate. Another example, dear to my heart, I suppose, is the science behind telecommunications, radio, TV. These great inventions have given us such treasures as Country Calendar, but also, Prime Minister, your second favourite show, Fish of the Day. But on the flip side, the science behind broadcasting has also given a platform to Mike Hosking. So you I guess the lesson is that with great power comes great responsibility, and we all just need to be careful. So use that power carefully. Hey. We've got a little bit of housekeeping to do before we kick off, so Moana, I'll hand it over to you.
Kia ora, Dan. I'd now like to welcome our South Island visitors from Te Kō Manawa, Rowley Avenue School in Christchurch. They were so good at last year's Research Honours Aotearoa in Ōtautahi that we've asked them to help us again with outlining the health and safety messages. Kasaya Gali and Lashani Sefo, kia ora kōrua, welcome, and over to you.
Tāu whalawa, loi ngō Lashani Sefo. E se pono mole tolo o tausanga, o te Samakarestete, o te Aotearoa Villa Maria College. Good evening, everyone. My name is Lashani Sefo. I am 13 years old and I come from Christchurch. I attend Villa Maria College.
Mālo soifua mō loi mama, loi mō kasaya ngari, e spuntasi o tausama, o te sau mai a Paraskeke, o te ao mai te Cornwall Valley School. Evening, everyone. My name is Kasaya Ngari. I'm 11 years old. I come from Washbrock and I attend Cornwall Valley School.
And this evening, we will be presenting your emergency messages. In case of an emergency, stay calm. Please listen to and follow the instructions and stay off your mobile phones. Do not take photos or videos or TikToks of the incident. In an earthquake, drop, cover and hold until it is safe to move and leave. Evacuating the theatre. Building's alarm system will sound or you will be told by wardens to leave. The exits are here, here and here. Please do not run, especially if you're wearing high heels. You will not be able to retrieve the items from the coat check during an evacuation. And yes, you may have to leave your handbags behind. Our meeting point is on the car park area in front of the building.
There will be outside or waiting while the building is being checked, cleared and deemed safe to be entered. We are currently operating at COVID-19 level 1. We offer the COVID-19 shows our scanning app at the front entrances and hand sanitizer stations are around the building. Dr. Ashley Bloomfield says, "Be vigilant. We should take them seriously. This is our not spreading video and campus. If you are a swimmer, quit. If you wish to swim, give up. If you still want to swim, you must leave the grounds and while you're swimming, call Portline 3 or Boya 106. 4006 for information."
And our last message, the Prime Minister is here with us this afternoon. If something goes bad, emergency services will be coming to pick her up first. Don't worry, we'll all be sorted too.
We feel that in an emergency we are covered. Kia ora, be well, stay safe, and Crusaders on top!
Thank you very much, Kazaya and Lashana. You guys are fantastic. Kia ora. Just before we get into this year's winners, we'd like to acknowledge last year's winners who are here. I can see some of you around the room. Of course, with the digital version of last year's events, we didn't get to see you kanohi ki te kanohi, so it's great to have you here today. Can I ask now the Honourable Dr. Megan Woods to come and join us on stage to say a few words?
Tēnā koutou ina mātawaka, tēnā koutou i te haukainga ti Aotearoa, tēnā koutou i ranga i te kaupapa o te ahi. Noi reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. It's my very great pleasure to be able to be here at today's ceremony alongside our Prime Minister and welcome you all here to this year's ceremony where we recognise and celebrate the achievement of our scientists and researchers. I'd like to welcome the 2020 award recipients, their whānau, colleagues, friends and supporters who have played an important role in their successes. Now, 4 years into being the Minister of Research, Science and Innovation, I won't make the mistake of pre-announcing all the winners in my speech, like I did in my first trot out in this gig. But thank you to our hosts here today, to Massey University and Professor Wendy Lana and the Royal Society, to Aotearoa team for their collective mahi in running the Prime Minister's Science Prizes. And I'd just like to take a moment to thank Wendy for her time at the helm of the Royal Society. You've made a big difference, Wendy, and I think if we look around at today's event, we can see your imprint on this. So thank you for your work. And I look forward to continuing that journey with you, Cindy. I'd like to acknowledge our wonderful three Masters of Ceremony, Moana, Dan and Meihana, for your work here today and making this a special day. To our esteemed guests, in particular the past recipients attending this afternoon's celebrations, welcome and thank you for the excellent research and expertise that you have contributed to Aotearoa, New Zealand. Now, I'm going to completely misuse my time at this podium and give a special shout out to our visitors from Christchurch. Not only are they from Christchurch, they're from the electorate of Wigram. In fact, their school is only a few metres from my electorate office in Rowley in Hoon Hay. It is wonderful to see all of the students here from Rowley Avenue School entertaining the crowd. This is what all people in Wigram are like. They're all entertaining. And especially, as I noted to the Prime Minister, our colleague Chris Farfoy, who himself is a graduate of the fine school of Rowley Avenue School. So welcome, and I hope you stay in Wellington for some time, and I look forward to catching up with you. And it's great to have you at this special event, the Prime Minister's Science Prizes, that recognise the positive impact that our brightest and most innovative minds have on New Zealanders and their lives. This has never been more evident than in the past year, where the COVID-19 pandemic has put a spotlight on the vital role that research, science and innovation play in our day-to-day lives. Evidence matters. As we increasingly exist in a world where the truth is seen as contested, it is wonderful to have expertise and people that can provide an evidence base for decision making. Because as a government, we have ambitious goals, including transitioning to a low emissions economy that is diverse, innovative, resilient, productive and inclusive. And we cannot achieve these goals without the knowledge and support our science community provides into that. People are central to our scientific community, and excellent people lead to excellent research. Diversity creates the best competition of ideas and ensures wider perspectives reflect the needs of our diverse society. Diversity is a big priority for myself and for my Associate Minister of Science, Dr. Aotearoa, in this portfolio. And I've really enjoyed working with Wendy Lana and with the Prime Minister's Chief Science Advisor, Dame Professor Juliet Gerard, on this over the last couple of years. As we will see, that our research, science and innovation sector suffers from underrepresentation. For example, only 5% of total researchers identify as Māori, 1.7% as Pacific peoples, and only 24.7% of the total number of professors and deans are women. This is not good enough. So last month we saw the opening of the new Equity, Diversity and Inclusion funding opportunity that will support research organisations to uplift their capability to identify and remove barriers within workplaces to improve on this. Research shows that persisting systemic issues in the scientific workforce mean that our women, Māori and Pasifika have been heavily impacted by the effects of COVID-19 in our communities. We have work to do to turn the tide. Strong leadership, allies, mentors and role models who challenge and raise awareness of biases and inequities are needed. You can't be what you can't see. So recipients of the Prime Minister's Science Prizes are leaders and role models in their communities. So I call on you to help create a scientific workforce that better represents the vibrancy and diversity of New Zealand's population. To today's winners, thank you for your hard work and accomplishments that will continue to make positive and long-lasting impact on New Zealand. It's now my very great pleasure to introduce someone who has a deep appreciation of science and evidence, as many of you in the room can attest to, and to introduce the Honourable Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern and welcome her to speak. Thank you.
Te whare e tūnei te marae e tā koto ana. Tēnā koroa, e ne mātai maha, haere, haere, haere. Nā tangata whenua o tēnei rohi, te Aotearoa, tēnā koutou. Tātou nā kanohi e re hui mai ana, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Thank you, Minister Woods, for that introduction, and I do also want to acknowledge Wendy, Professor Dame Juliet Gerard, Dame Cindy Kero, Dame Lowell Goddard, as well as my other parliamentary colleagues and past winners who are here today, the judging panel, all our applicants, and of course those who are here in support of these very important awards, and I'm very, very pleased that we're able to be here face-to-face on this occasion. Also, I want to add to the shameless plug of Wigram, my special welcome to the student representatives with us today. Kazai and Lashame, I've never heard health and safety quite so entertaining as with you, and so thank you very much. And just as a general note, of course, I know the appreciation we all have for wanting to promote the sciences to our young people, because it is just so important that we have a generation who are excited by what the sciences can offer as a career, and I hope we're sharing that message. Do you know, I remember my first time attending these awards and talking at that point hypothetically about how important science would be to the future challenges that our government and indeed any government would face. Now, I don't want to personally put it upon all of you that somehow you wanted to prove just how important science would be. But when I think back since that, for that first opportunity to speak at those events, even I underestimated the centrality of that advice for me in this time in office and just how important it would become to us as a government. Some, in fact, probably don't recall the very first moment where really science sat at the centre of one of the key decisions that we made quite early on. I remember coming in and being told by the Ministry for Primary Industries that we had a biosecurity incursion that threatened New Zealand's national herd and could lead potentially to a massive economic crisis for us. And that was the issue of Mycoplasma bovis. And as we sat and discussed that issue, I remember being told that potentially we had the option of eradicating Mycoplasma bovis from New Zealand and asking the question of those who put that offer to us, who has done that before? The answer was no one. And yet, based on evidence and the best advice we could muster, we made the determination that despite it having been done nowhere before, we believed we could eliminate. And maybe that was the first entree into New Zealand taking a perspective that despite others telling us something was not possible, it would be possible to eliminate. I'm pleased to tell you we're on track with Mycoplasma bovis as well. Next came March 15, and many people would probably not appreciate that even in the midst of that, Dame Juliet Gerard pulled together a team of science advisors across the network and in particular produced advice to support us in the psychosocial response to that enormous tragedy. Whakaari, White Island. Many may conclude that after that event perhaps the role of science wasn't as great in the aftermath. I credit the advice that we received from our scientists with our ability to eventually make the recovery that we did from Whakaari, because it was our scientists who enabled the Defence Force and New Zealand Police to make a calculation on risk that allowed them to re-enter. And, of course, perhaps the example we all know best and are most familiar with, the pandemic of COVID-19. I want to share with you the tale of two graphs. I remember very early on a debate raging globally around different approaches to COVID-19. New Zealand at that time may have been somewhat advantaged by the fact that COVID was spreading in other parts of the world more rapidly than it was in ours. So for a short time we observed the response of others. Some countries started talking immediately about the notion of herd immunity. Others adopt the idea of crushing the graph, a suppression strategy, as it were. And then there was the third option that no one seemed to be talking about, and that was elimination. When we were discussing the idea of New Zealand's response, you'll remember very early on the graph that was being used publicly and communicated so importantly by our scientists about why trying to crush that curve was so important. It was so our health system could cope. One day after a technical advisory group meeting, I remember Dr. Ian Town and Dr. Juliet Gerard demonstrating to me that that graph in New Zealand wasn't quite what we expected. our hospital capacity sat under that line. So essentially a suppression strategy would mean people dying. That was the day that our elimination strategy was born, and it was born of science. I want to thank the many, many, many people in this room who were a part in their own ways of either helping us generate the information we needed to make those decisions, or who helped us communicate those decisions when it mattered most, or just inform the New Zealand public of what they needed to do to keep themselves safe. And I acknowledge our New Zealander of the Year, Susie Wiles, which I think demonstrates the appreciation that New Zealand has for the role that you played over the past year. And that's before we get into your day job. And if I may so indulge, I want to personally acknowledge my Chief Science Advisor, Dame Juliet Gerard, who has been invaluable to me. I call her day and night, and through that pandemic, it was literally day and night, making sure that we had the best response we could so that we could save people's lives. So to those of you who are being acknowledged today, you have my heartfelt gratitude. The letters that I get from people in New Zealand who know that you made a difference to them, I wish I could share every single one of them, but I'll finish with one. An intensive care specialist who wrote to tell me that the response to COVID-19 had meant that we collectively had saved more lives than he ever would in his career. I pass that gratitude on to you. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
Ngā mihi nui e te Premier. Thank you, Prime Minister, for your kōrero. Ngā mihi hoki e te Minister. Thank you also, Honourable Dr. Megan Woods.
We're about to get into it, but before we do, I don't know if you can see these trophies hiding out the back there, but they're a work of art, they're a beautiful thing, and we owe our gratitude to Callaghan Innovation for those beautiful taonga that we'll be handing out this afternoon. So, a round of applause for everyone. Moana, I think we're about to do this.
We are. Okay. Can we ask the Prime Minister and Minister Woods back to the stage to help with the prize ceremony? Tēnā kōrua. Okay. The 2020 winner of the Te Puiaki Kai Pūtaiao Ana Mata Prime Minister's Future Scientist Prize worth $50,000 is James Zingle of Bethlehem College in Tauranga.
James's research project used a breast cancer dataset run through both a classical computer and a quantum computer in an effort to see which is superior in analysing the data and determining the type of breast cancer present. James has spent hundreds of hours delving into this project and has learnt so much in terms of quantum physics and machine learning. The selection panel was impressed with the way he applied himself wholeheartedly to this complex project and his enthusiasm for quantum computing.
Hello, my name is James Zingle. I'm year 13 and I go to Bethlehem College in Tauranga. My project involved taking a quantum computer and a classical computer and analysing a breast cancer data set and then seeing which one was more successful. So in medicine it's really important that you have an early diagnosis that's correct, and in particular it's quite hard for doctors to do this. So if the computer can correctly identify what the disease is, you have a much better chance of surviving it. And this is particularly important with breast cancer. There's an open source breast cancer data set that I could use, and so I decided to try these new techniques. The main difference between quantum computing and classical computing is that in classical computing you have bits which are either 1 or 0. They're electronic circuits that are either on or they're off. So in a classical computer it has to be on or off because that's how electricity works. But in quantum computing it can be maybe 2/3 on or maybe 1/3 on, and that allows for a whole nother avenue of complexity. In my findings I concluded that at the moment the classical method is better than the quantum one, but I suspect as our quantum computing grows and we get more qubits in our quantum computers, I think the quantum algorithm will much outperform the classical one in the very near future.
James's project was obviously a very significant part of his senior schooling here at Bethlehem. But to be fair, the majority of the momentum came from James himself, and I'm sure that given his wholehearted approach, that he will do tremendously well with the support of like-minded and talented people at university level.
So I love sharing my project with people. I love teaching them a bit more about quantum physics, especially as they think I'm an expert in it. I'm really not. But it really is my passion, and I love how people always just get excited by it, excited by the future, and that's the exact same reaction that I have. So I really love sharing it, and it's been a wonderful project to do.
Congratulations, James.
Good afternoon, everyone. I've spent so much time on this project, and during my hundreds of hours of working on it last summer, I can truly say I never thought it would end this way, but I'm deeply honoured to receive the Prime Minister's Future Scientist Prize for 2020, and I would truly like to thank the Royal Society and the Prime Minister for this honour. I've always dreamed of being a scientist, and this is just one more step closer to that goal. But I really couldn't have done this project without help, and I would really like to thank my mentor, Gorka Manons-Gill, for helping me with the quantum physics side, and my principal at school, Mr. Ed Meads, for nominating me. I also couldn't have done it without my family, and I want to thank them for putting up with me while I've been hiding in my room all summer, and I haven't really seen much. This award will undoubtedly change my life, and hugely assist my future studies in university while I do my Bachelor of Science degree and beyond that. So thank you very much.
Congratulations, James. The next award is Te Pueaki Whakapā Pūtaiao, the Prime Minister's Science Communication Prize. This prize is worth $75,000, and the 2020 winner is Professor Michael Baker from the University of Otago.
Michael's been one of New Zealand's go-to science experts since the start of the pandemic. He's done more than 2,000 interviews since January 2020, contributing over 30% of the total science outputs recorded for the 70 commentators. Michael's communication has increasingly had an international focus, with more than 100 interviews with international media. His research showing that the elimination strategy protected public health and also supported better economic recovery than alternative suppression and mitigation approaches.
Kia ora, my name's Michael Baker. I'm Professor of Public Health at the University of Otago in Wellington. My first awareness of COVID-19 was in early January last year. I was just reading accounts of it and thinking that's something to keep an eye on. Early on, I felt compelled to speak about this virus because I had been studying pandemic diseases for several decades, and I could just see with this pandemic it was really different. It was a global pandemic. It needed really decisive action, and I felt we needed a different direction from the one we were taking. With my colleagues, we started writing lots of blogs, which we would often write overnight and then put out the next day and then talk to media, because we found that was one way of communicating with decision makers. Given the success in China and other Asian countries, it was clear by the end of February, our focus became very much on promoting the containment elimination model. And so I started talking directly with politicians, and we also were talking with the media a great deal about what to do. So I think I've probably done approaching 2,000 interviews since the start of 2020. I think probably of every media I could think of, and even a few I hadn't thought of before. Equity of communication is a huge challenge to make sure that essential knowledge does reach all corners of New Zealand, particularly those who are most vulnerable. That's why it is important to nurture a whole generations of science communicators from many different backgrounds. Well, I think I've got my whānau at home and also a whānau at work, and they've both been wonderful at supporting me during this period. Really, for much of the last year, I kind of disappeared into my office at home or at work and spent a vast amount of time just staring at my computer screen, and so really I've been very well looked after both at home and at work by my wonderful family and also by my colleagues. Well, tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you, Prime Minister, Minister Woods and the Royal Society for this wonderful award. There's so much to communicate and so little time. First of all, I want to thank my wonderful wife, Katie, my children, Augusta, George and Euphemia, who've kept me sane over the last year by frequently reminding me about or stopping me turning into a complete COVID bore. I want to really thank my supportive work whānau, particularly Professors Nick Wilson, Philippa Howden-Chapman, Simon Hales and Dr. Amanda Klausvig and Tim Chambers. I also want to acknowledge our journalists who have done an exceptional job in communicating the science, supported by the remarkable Science Media Centre and our very effective Chief Science Advisors. Of course, journalists are the fourth estate, and I thought perhaps for completeness I should mention the other three estates. I had to look it up. It's the clergy, nobles and peasants. So I'm not sure that has quite the right ring to it at the moment. Of course, ultimately, Aotearoa's successful COVID-19 response has depended more than anything on a courageous government that put public health first. Also to our highly effective public service and health sector. I also want to acknowledge the people who are not here, who are not identified, who do not get awards, but are working tirelessly to keep New Zealand safe. We can't turn the clock back on the pandemic or reverse its terrible human cost, but we can and must use this opportunity to apply the lessons we've learned to build the health-promoting, egalitarian and sustainable society we all need. So, kia kaha.
Kia ora, Michael. Now to the Te Uiaki Kai Whakaako Pūtaiao Prime Minister's Science Teacher Prize. This prize is worth $150,000 and the 2020 winner is Sarah Washbrock from Remarkables Primary School in Queenstown.
Sarah is the first technology teacher to win the Prime Minister's Science Teacher Prize. Her hands-on approach to teaching technology is so engaging for her students that they often remain unaware of the depth and range of learning they're doing. The selection panel was most impressed with the way that Sarah's work is increasing student participation and engagement in technology at her school and within the community, and also by how she develops and shares resources to the wider New Zealand technology teaching community.
My name is Sarah Washbrock. I am the STEM and Technology Specialist at Remarkables Primary School down in Queenstown. I have what's called a hands-on approach to technology. So I try and stimulate the students into engaging learning by giving them different opportunities in different themes and different contexts. They usually start by creating something or designing something or making something, and then we bring in other aspects. A lot of my students don't actually realise that they're doing a lot of maths and English and scientific principles in technology until I actually point out afterwards they've done an hour of writing, for example, in computational thinking. And I said, you guys have just been doing writing for an hour. And they said, no, we've been doing digital technology. And I said, no, you've been writing.
I suppose one example would be when we developed our computerised gardens. They didn't come to the classroom, they went out to the garden straight away. They were looking and measuring, they were watching and learning alongside our older students. You know, has it grown? What's happening? And that partnership of learning was just incredible.
So I incorporated our Māori or aspects of whanaungatanga within my teaching at Remarkables, bring in the stories of tangata whenua through some of the different projects. So we've had EnviroSchool projects, for example, where we've started by telling the stories of Papatuanuku. Technology, not only is it about knowledge and skills, it's also about real-world learning, authentic learning for students. So seeing creativity, seeing empathy through the design thinking process, because life isn't straightforward. There are always going to be problems and setbacks. So if they can learn to learn for themselves and they can learn to solve problems and go back again and be prepared to try again, then those skills are going to set them up for life in the future too. Tēnā koutou katoa. I must say I'm very, very honoured to be here today, and I'm very thankful to the Prime Minister and the Royal Society for being here and representing teachers across New Zealand. I feel very privileged to be the first technology teacher to actually win this award today. There are many, many passionate, experienced, enthusiastic teachers out there, and I feel quite actually overwhelmed that I'm the person that's here representing them today. So I just want to call out to those, because this award's actually for them too. It's not just for me. I'd like to say a big thank you to all my colleagues, both at my school and across New Zealand that I work with on different councils. I have had lots of support and lots of guidance and lots of help from them. And I can't really go from here, the podium, without saying thank you and much thanks and much araha to my family who are here today, somewhere up there. Oh, at the back, there they go. Hi, family. Without their support and their guidance from my mum and dad, and my sister's here as well, and my husband Jim and my two boys, which you actually saw playing with the bebop there, they've got dicky bows on today. And in fact, actually, I need to apologise to them. They thought they were coming here today to see me in a dancing competition. So, sorry boys, but hopefully this is worth it. And thank you very much. I'd just like to finish with a whakatoki, which means a lot to me as a teacher, as a learner myself, because I'm always learning in the subject of technology, and as a mum and a colleague to everybody too. And it's Papoia te kakano kia puwai, which means nurture the seed and it will blossom. Thank you.
I'm really curious now. Sarah, do you dance?
Not in these heels, no.
Oh, right. No, they say the best lie to tell is the one that's closest to the truth. I was just checking that. Our next award is the Te Puiaki Kai Taio Meia Prime Minister's McDiarmid Emerging Scientist Prize. This prize is worth $200,000, and the 2020 winner is Dr. Christopher Cornwall from Te Herenga Waka, Victoria University of Wellington.
Chris studies how warmer and more acidic ocean water affects the ability of calcifying marine organisms to lay down calcium carbonate to grow and make their skeletons. His cutting-edge research using boron isotopes showed for the first time the pH levels inside the organisms where they lay down this calcium carbonate. This allowed him to identify those species with a greater ability to keep their internal pH constant under ocean acidification. Sounding an urgent warning, he says these reefs will be badly impacted by both ocean acidification and warming. Our ability to keep CO2 emissions down is really the best way we can protect these reefs for the future.
My name's Dr. Christopher Cornwall, and I'm a Rutherford Discovery Fellow at the School of Biological Sciences, Te Herenga Waka, Victoria University of Wellington. So my research seeks to understand how climate change will impact the ability of what we call calcifying species to grow. So ocean acidification is a process of decreasing seawater pH, and this is caused by the increases in CO2 in the atmosphere. And this CO2 is absorbed into the surface waters of the world's oceans. It decreases what we call seawater pH, so making it more acidic and less alkaline. And what it also does is it changes the types of carbon that are available in seawater. Together, these two processes impact the ability of calcifying species to grow and make their skeleton. Coral and algae are the pink stuff that you see on the rock, and they're really ecologically important. So what we found with both coral and algae and corals, there were a range of species that had specific metabolisms, and so some species were inherently able to resist ocean acidification, and there are a range of other species, most of them, that weren't able to resist ocean acidification. We next wanted to understand whether they could gain the ability to tolerate acidification, and so we ran an 8-generation experiment and found that after 6 generations, this one specific species of coral and algae were able to gain the ability to resist the effects of ocean acidification. So winning this prize means to me a great deal. It's humbling to receive this award. I think it's an ideal time for this type of research to be awarded. Climate change is impacting our marine ecosystems. So to me, that is an acknowledgement of the problem, but also an acknowledgement of some of the cutting-edge research that myself and my great colleagues have done in the past, understanding the mechanisms involved in determining how climate change will impact species across a broad range of physiologies and environments. Tēnā koutou, thank you very much for having me here, and thanks for this award. It's really humbling to receive this, and like I said in the video, it's really a great time for research on climate change to be highlighted, given the plights of our oceans currently. So we've only got a short time for the speech, so I'm going to quickly thank my supporters, so my family who are in the audience, particularly my wife May, and like all science, you see one person standing up here receiving an award, but actually it's a huge collaborative effort, right? And so without my colleague Malcolm McCulloch, renowned geochemist, Steve Camo, coral physiologist, this type of work wouldn't be possible with our combined skills. So I'd also like to thank them, and thank you all for having me here in this award.
And now to our final award this afternoon, Te Puiaki Pūtaiao Mātua a Te Piramia, Prime Minister's Science Prize. This prize is worth $500,000.
This prize is for a transformative scientific discovery or achievement which has had a significant economic, health, social and/or environmental impact on New Zealand or internationally.
And it's awarded this year to a team instrumental in creating that impact. So the winner is
Te Pūnaha Matatini.
Te Pūnaha Matatini, hosted at University of Auckland, is a multidisciplinary centre of research excellence set up to apply complexity science to critical issues of our time. Centre Director Professor Sean Hendy quickly saw in early 2020 that there was a gap in providing the New Zealand Government with the data science it needed to make informed decisions about responding to the pandemic. He assembled a group who's worked tirelessly to fill this need. The team's response has been multifaceted. Throughout the pandemic, they've developed a series of new mathematical models and run a multitude of different scenarios to inform the unique situation that New Zealand has found itself in. The World Health Organization said that the COVID-19 response work of Te Pūnaha Matatini has had significant health and social impacts for Aotearoa New Zealand and internationally, contributing to New Zealand's internationally coveted status as one of only a limited number of nation-states which have eliminated and contained the virus.
Early on, it was early March, and we were thinking about, well, what was going to happen. We thought, well, will we be able to get together in April for our hui that we'd planned? And so our simulations told us no. Actually, probably the country's going to have to lock down, and even if we didn't lock down, we're not going to be wanting to get together because the infection would have spread so widely across the country by that point.
We knew it was serious, right? We'd seen the pictures in Italy and the sorts of things that were happening around the world. I think we knew the potential it had, but seeing the actual numbers in front of you was, made it feel a lot more real.
I got in touch with Juliette Gerard, the Prime Minister's Chief Science Advisor, and started talking to her. And then questions started coming back the other way. Could you look at this scenario? Could you look at that scenario? And then I gradually realised that there just weren't a lot of modelling tools around and available and being used. And so at that point, that's where I started having serious conversations with people about crash starting this modelling program.
We had this unique opportunity to focus on an elimination strategy, but that needed to be a situated strategy that understood the nature of New Zealand, our bicultural relationship, te tiriti, and the impact that racism and colonisation have had on Māori, and how that would differentially affect Māori in both the effects of the pandemic, but also the effects of disinformation. And so we instantaneously knew that we really had to look at this communication, information, disinformation strand at the same time as doing things like modelling for how the pandemic might spread.
One of the things that Sean and his team did was they put an equity lens on this pretty much immediately. So it wasn't an afterthought. And that was really useful because it set the tone for a government response, because it was inbuilt into the data that government was getting. It was inbuilt into the other channels that were getting similar data, because the Māori data people were all very well networked. It meant that the equity conversation was there at the beginning.
It's one thing to advise the Prime Minister, but the public have to understand what's going on as well. None of us had really had personal experience with this kind of situation before, and the modelling is one of those very few tools that can give you insight into what's going on. So we really followed this principle that, yes, we'll advise the Prime Minister, but we want the public to see that advice, to see that modelling as soon as possible afterwards.
People need to understand how their actions help, right? I felt like it was empowering people, that instead of just being told, we need you to do this thing, to say, here's why. Here's how you can help. Here's how you are part of the team that is going to, get us through that. And that's all evidence-based, right? The research shows that communities that come together in times of crisis, that look after each other, they are the communities that survive that crisis.
We're not winding up. We're going to keep, one of the things we want to do is to sort of set up the tools that we developed, leave them for the next pandemic modellers. We had to build our tools from scratch, and we don't want Aotearoa to be caught in that situation again. So we'll be leaving our tools, making them open so that they can be maintained in perpetuity and built on, so that next time we have an infectious disease crisis, they're available for people to use. And also we're going to be getting on and looking at all those other problems that faces New Zealand.
There are 24 people in this winning team. Professor Sean Hendy, Director of Te Pūnaha Matatini, supported by Kate Hanna, Susie Wiles, Andrew Spall, Dion O'Neill, Elsa Zidens and Mike Platt.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. On behalf of the team, some of whom are up there with me, I'd like to thank you, Prime Minister, and the selection panel for honouring us with this award. I think even the wider team that are here with us today are really representative of a much wider effort across the science community that's been in response to the pandemic. And I'd also like to acknowledge Michael and your award tonight. Michael's been a collaborator for us throughout the pandemic. I think for us and many other scientists, it's been an unforgettable and hopefully not to be repeated experience, working under tight time frames and uncertain circumstances and with so much at stake. But we got through it because we had each other's backs and we were supported by many others. Most importantly, that included our whānau and our co-workers who were there for us when things got tough and who in many instances carried an extra burden of work so that we could focus on the virus. I'd also like to acknowledge the very talented team of policy analysts, science advisors and journalists who worked very closely with us and still do today to make sure that our work was well understood, relevant and utilised by decision makers and New Zealanders. Crucially, we were trusted by this group to communicate our work directly to the public so that everyone in Aotearoa had access to our science almost as soon as the Prime Minister did. And lastly, let me thank the team of 5 million, and especially those on the front line, for trusting and acting on our science. Without trust, our work would have been for nothing. Kia ora.
Can we have one more big round of applause for all the winners this afternoon?
And ngā mihi hoki to all those who have supported us this afternoon, all the tauira, events team, and to our Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Jacinda Ardern, and Minister Dr. Megan Woods. He wahine toa.
This nearly completes the formal part of this afternoon, but can we just ask all the winners and your whānau to stay with us here in the theatre for a few more photos.
And so Professor Jury will shortly close off the official part of this event, and then the rest of us, we will return to the foyer to continue celebrating the winners and to enjoy some beautiful wai and kai. Professor Jury.
Tēnā kōrua, Dan kōrua ko moana, ho mai te paki mo tēnei tokorua. Just before we close this evening, Prime Minister, I once again want to acknowledge all of our winners here this afternoon and to implore upon all of us, and indeed Aotearoa, to take and fill our kete with the inspiration based on the accomplishments of each and every one of our award winners this afternoon. Nō reira, tēnei te mihi nui ki a koutou katoa. The karakia to conclude our hui this afternoon is about elevating the degree of accomplishment that we have celebrated this afternoon and ensuring that the accomplishments and the achievements are not left here in this hall, but the messages that you've all shared with us this afternoon travel the width and the breadth of Aotearoa. So when we get to the part at the end where I say haume e, hui e, the louder your taiki e, the greater chance we have of spreading the messages and the achievements of our winners wide and far. Nō reira, kia kaha tātou. Te huanga o te whakaaro nui he puakitanga mā tauranga, tuia ki te ira tangata, tāwhiwhi atu ki te kāhui o ngā tua. Ko horahia te takapau wharanui, te rerenga o te kōrero ki te ao marama. Marama ki uta, marama ki tai. Tahi a te ki, tahi a te wānanga, hoatu e rongo, whakairi hiake te ki te kōrero ki runga ki te tāhuhu o te whare pūtaia. Te kupu kōrero kia mau, te ki te wānanga ki au, o whiwhia, o rawea, tūrau parea, tūrau Hawaiki. E rarau ki te tapawai nui o tāne. Tāne i te wāranga, tāne nui ārangi, turuturu ōwhiti whakamaua kia tīnā, haumi e, hui e, tai ki e, hapai, kia ora tātou.